My mother always wanted a daughter. She forced me to marry a woman who cheated on me. But when the paternity test revealed 0%, and she testified against me under oath to force me to accept a baby that wasn't mine, I exposed her to everyone, and she lost her husband of 30 years, her son, and her entire family. I'm 34 years old. I work as an accountant at a mid-sized firm, and I need to tell this story because what my own mother did to me basically destroyed whatever relationship we ever had, and it also destroyed her marriage of over 30 years with my father. The thing is, I always knew, since I was a kid, that my mom wanted a daughter. It wasn't something she hid much, to be honest. I remember when I was like 7 or 8 years old, she would dress me in shirts that had ruffles or very soft colors, and my dad had to tell her to let me wear normal boy clothes. But I never thought, I never imagined she would go as far as betraying me the way she did. I grew up as an only child because my mom, Vivian, had complications after having me and couldn't get pregnant again. My dad, Raymond, was always super understanding about that and treated me perfectly. I never felt like anything was missing in his life. But Vivian, well, she was different. Every time she saw her friends with their daughters, she would get into a weird mood. She bought girls' clothes at stores and kept them in the basement, like just in case we adopted or something, but that never happened. When I turned 15, she sat me down one day in the kitchen and told me, "You know, Samuel, I always dreamed of having a girl, painting her nails and doing her hair and taking her shopping, and you're wonderful, but it's not the same." I remember just sitting there, not knowing what to say, because what's a teenager supposed to respond to that? Sorry for not being born a girl, I guess. Life went on pretty normally after that, more or less. I went to college, studied accounting, got my job, and everything was going well until I turned 27. That's when Vivian started with her master plan, though I didn't know it at the time. Turns out she had a friend from high school, Joyce, and Joyce had a daughter named Michelle. Vivian organized what was basically a blind date between Michelle and me. And when I say she organized everything, I mean she literally ambushed us. She invited me to dinner at her house one Sunday, and Michelle was there, sitting in the living room like nothing. And my mom introduced me, saying, "Look, Samuel, this is Michelle, my friend Joyce's daughter. Isn't she gorgeous?" The thing is, Michelle was pretty. I'm not gonna lie. She was like 25 years old, blonde, always very put together, and my mom wouldn't stop talking about what a good girl she was, how she went to church every Wednesday to do volunteer work, how she helped her mom with everything. During the following months, Vivian basically forced us to go out. Every weekend, there was some plan where Michelle would be present, and my mom would call me all the time asking if I had formally asked her out yet. I finally gave in. Mostly so my mom would leave me alone, and I started dating Michelle. We dated for a year, and it wasn't horrible, I have to admit. Michelle was nice, we got along well, though I always felt like we didn't have much real chemistry, you know what I mean? It was more like having a pleasant companion than a deep romantic connection. But Vivian was in heaven, literally. Every time we went to visit her, she would start planning things with Michelle. They'd talk about decoration and clothes and all those things she could never do with me. One day I realized that my mom was more excited about my relationship than I was, which should have been a giant red flag. But I was young and stupid. When we'd been dating for a year, I proposed to Michelle. It wasn't because of a romantic revelation or anything dramatic. I basically felt like it was what was expected of me at that point. My mom cried when she found out, and these weren't normal happy mother tears. It was like she had won the lottery. She immediately started planning the wedding. And when I say planning, I mean she took absolute control. She hired a wedding planner, booked a super expensive venue, invited like 200 people, half of whom I didn't even know. And I told him yes, though honestly I wasn't that sure, but we were already too deep to back out. We got married in a ceremony that probably cost more than what I make in a year. Michelle looked beautiful. Everyone was crying. Vivian seemed like the happiest person on the planet. The first months of marriage were normal. We lived in an apartment I'd been renting since before I met her, and Michelle quit her job at a clothing store to be a housewife, which seemed fine to me because I earned enough for both of us. The plan was that she would take care of the house and eventually we'd start trying to have kids, which made my mom literally tremble with excitement every time it was mentioned. But like 6 months into being married, I started noticing weird things. Michelle would go out a lot, like several times a week, and she always said she was going to church to do her volunteer work or that she was going to see her mom. When she'd get home at night, the house was a mess, there was no food prepared, and she was always tired or in a bad mood. At first, I thought maybe she was depressed or something, and I tried to be understanding. I asked her if she wanted us to go to therapy together or if she needed help with anything, but she always said she was fine, that she'd just had a long day. One afternoon, I think it was a Wednesday, I left work early because we'd finished a big project and my boss let us go at 3. I decided to stop by the church where Michelle supposedly volunteered because I thought it would be nice to surprise her and maybe take her to dinner or something. I got to the church and asked for her at the main office. The secretary, a very kind older lady, looked at me confused and said, "Michelle? We don't have any Michelle volunteering here." I described my wife, gave her full last name, and the lady checked her records and confirmed that never, in the 2 years she'd been working there, had she seen anyone with that name volunteering. I stood there at the church entrance feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. If she wasn't volunteering at church, where the hell had she been going 2 or 3 times a week for the last 6 months? I called Michelle, but she didn't answer, which was weird because she always answered my calls. I drove home and she wasn't there. I waited like 2 hours until she arrived, around 7 at night, and when she came in, I asked her directly, "Where were you?" She told me at church, volunteering like always. I told her I'd gone to the church and they'd told me she'd never worked there. The face she made, was pure panic. She started stammering, saying that maybe the secretary was new and didn't know who she was, that there was a misunderstanding. But I'm not an idiot, and her reaction gave me all the confirmation I needed. I didn't say anything else that night. I just went to sleep on the couch because I couldn't even look at her. The following days were weird. She was acting super nervous and I started paying attention to everything. I checked our shared bank accounts and there was nothing suspicious, so at least she wasn't spending money on something weird. But she kept going out with the same frequency, and every time she left, I felt this horrible anxiety in my chest. Like a week after all this, I decided to follow her. I know it sounds terrible, but I needed to know the truth. One Wednesday afternoon, I told her I had to work late and stayed in our building's parking lot waiting. Michelle left around 2, all dressed up, perfect makeup, clothes that definitely weren't for volunteer work. I followed her in my car, keeping my distance so she wouldn't see me, and she drove like 20 minutes to a neighborhood I didn't know. She parked in front of a normal house, middle class, and waited in the car for like 5 minutes. Then I saw a guy come out of the house, get in Michelle's car, and they kissed. It wasn't a friend kiss. It was a kiss from people who clearly had something going on. I felt like I'd been emptied out inside, literally. I took out my phone and started taking pictures of them because something in my brain told me I was going to need evidence of this. After like 10 minutes kissing in the car, they got out and went into the house together. I stayed there sitting in my car for like an hour, not knowing what to do, until I got out and knocked on the door of the house. Nobody opened, even though there were clearly people inside because I saw movement in one of the windows. I went back to my car, wrote down the address, and went home. The next 2 weeks were the worst of my life, but I needed to have everything well documented before confronting her. I followed her like 4 more times. It was always the same routine. She'd go to that house, the same guy would come out, they'd go in together. I hired a private investigator who cost me like $2,000, but it was worth every penny because he got clear photos of them kissing, going in and out of the house, and he even found out who the guy was. His name was Blake. He was 32 years old, and turns out he'd been Michelle's boyfriend in high school. Basically, she'd been having an affair with her ex this whole time. When I had all the evidence I needed, I confronted her. I came home on a Friday night with a folder full of photos and the private investigator's report. Michelle was on the couch, watching TV like nothing. I put the folder in front of her and said, "Want to explain this to me?" She opened it, started looking at the photos, and turned white as paper. She immediately started crying, saying she was so sorry, that it had been a mistake, that Blake had contacted her like 8 months ago, and she couldn't resist because he'd been the love of her life. Blah, blah, blah. I asked her if she'd been sleeping with him, and she just cried harder, which was answer enough. I told her I wanted a divorce, and for her to leave the house that same night. She started begging me not to do it, that she loved me, which was obviously a lie, that we could go to therapy. I wasn't interested in hearing any of that, so I called her mom, Joyce, and told her to come pick up her daughter because I was divorcing her. Joyce arrived in like half an hour, hysterical, yelling at me, how could I do this to her daughter? That marriage was forever, all that garbage. I showed her the photos and she immediately shut up. She took Michelle and I stayed alone in the apartment, feeling completely empty. On Monday, I went to a lawyer and started the divorce process. My lawyer told me that with all the evidence I had, the case would be pretty straightforward, especially since we didn't have kids or shared property. I did something that was maybe petty, but I felt I needed it. I created a group chat with Michelle, Joyce, my mom, Vivian, my dad, Raymond, and me, and shared all the photos and the investigator's report. I wrote a message basically explaining that Michelle had been having an affair for months and that I was divorcing her. My dad called me immediately, super supportive, telling me he was proud of me for not tolerating that from anyone and that he supported me 100%. I expected the same reaction from my mom, but what happened was the opposite. Vivian called me screaming, saying how dare I humiliate Michelle like that everyone makes mistakes, that I should be more understanding. I told her, understanding? Are you kidding me? And she continued, saying that Michelle was young and confused, that Blake had manipulated her, that I should give her another chance. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Literally. I hung up on her because I didn't want to say something I'd regret. During the following weeks, the divorce process moved forward, and I was staying at my dad's because I couldn't stand being alone in the apartment. My mom kept calling me, sending me messages, begging me to reconsider. She'd say things like, think about the grandchildren we could have. Think about the family you built together. And I'd respond that we hadn't built anything, that it had all been a lie, but she wouldn't listen. One day, I found out from my dad that Vivian had been visiting Michelle and Joyce, bringing them food and giving them emotional support. My dad was furious with her about that, and they had a massive fight. Then, like 2 months after the divorce process started, Michelle contacted me saying she needed to talk to me urgently. I didn't want to see her, but my lawyer said it was probably about the divorce, so I agreed to meet at a public cafe. She arrived looking horrible, like she'd been crying a lot, and before I could say anything, she dropped on me. I asked her how far along she was, and she told me 8 weeks. I did the mental math, and it was possible it was mine, but it was also possible it was Blake's. I told her I needed a paternity test, and she got really offended, saying how could I doubt it was my child, that she knew it was mine. I told her that she also knew she was doing volunteer work at church when she was actually sleeping with her ex, so excuse me if I don't trust your word. She left the cafe crying, and I stayed there feeling completely destroyed. The idea of being tied to this woman for the rest of my life through a child was my worst nightmare. My lawyer said that until there was a paternity test after the baby was born, we couldn't include custody or child support in the divorce, so we'd have to wait. I told my parents about the pregnancy, and my mom's reaction was what finally completely broke me. Vivian was euphoric. Like this was the best day of her life. She started talking about decorating a room for the baby at her house, buying clothes, being a grandmother. I told her it might not even be my child, and she told me, don't talk nonsense, Samuel. Of course it's your child, and even if you have doubts, you should accept it anyway because that baby needs a father. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother was telling me to raise a child that probably wasn't even mine just because she wanted to be a grandmother. My dad interrupted her and told her she was being ridiculous, that I had no obligation to accept a baby that might be the product of an affair. They started fighting right there, yelling things at each other, and I just left because I couldn't be there. Things got worse when the divorce case finally went to court. Michelle was asking for temporary spousal support until the baby was born, and her lawyer argued that since she'd quit her job to be a housewife, at my request, which was a half-truth, I had an obligation to support her. My lawyer presented all the evidence of the affair, and argued that she had violated the marriage contract, basically. The judge seemed to be on our side until something happened that I never expected. Michelle's lawyer called my mom to testify. Vivian took the stand and testified in favor of Michelle. She said, I'd been a negligent husband, that Michelle had sought comfort in another man because I worked too much and didn't pay attention to her, that the baby was definitely mine because Michelle had told her so, and Michelle would never lie about something like that. I was sitting there, in court, listening to my own mother say all these lies about me, and I felt like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My dad was sitting next to me and was gripping the arm of the chair so hard his knuckles were white. After the testimony ended, Michelle's lawyer presented text messages between Vivian and Michelle, where my mom told her things like, "Don't worry, I'll make sure Samuel does the right thing, and that baby is going to have everything it needs." The judge heard everything, and in the end, determined that Michelle would receive a small temporary support until the baby was born, and that after that a mandatory paternity test would be done before determining any type of child support or custody. I left that courtroom feeling completely betrayed, not just by my ex-wife, but by my own mother. My dad took me to his house, where I was already staying, and told me he was so sorry that he couldn't believe Vivian had done that. That night, my dad confronted Vivian at her house and called me later to tell me they'd had the biggest fight of their marriage. She kept insisting she'd done the right thing, that I needed to accept my responsibilities, that that baby was my child no matter what any test said. The following months were horrible. The divorce was finalized legally, but the whole baby thing was pending until it was born. Vivian kept visiting Michelle regularly, buying her things for the baby, going with her to medical appointments. My dad told me he'd tried to reason with her multiple times, but that Vivian was completely obsessed with this unborn baby. I cut all contact with my mom, didn't answer her calls or messages, and told my dad I didn't want to know anything about her until she apologized, which seemed like it was never going to happen. The baby was born in September, a girl, and obviously Vivian was at the hospital with Michelle when she was born. I wasn't invited or anything, which was perfect because I didn't want to be there anyway. 2 days after the birth, my lawyer coordinated the paternity test. It was super awkward. I had to go to the hospital to have a DNA sample taken while Michelle held the baby and looked at me with this pleading expression, like hoping that somehow the baby would make me change my mind about everything. The 2 weeks waiting for the results were some of the most anxious of my life. Part of me, a very small part, secretly hoped the baby was mine because at least it would mean all this pain had been for something real. But the bigger part of me, the rational part, knew there was a very good chance it wasn't mine, and I prayed that would be the case. The results came back and confirmed what I suspected. The baby wasn't mine. The report said 0% probability of paternity. I called my lawyer immediately, and he filed the results in court. Michelle was officially obligated to pay me back for the temporary support I'd been giving her, though honestly I never expected to see that money, and I was completely freed from any obligation to her or to the baby. The first thing I did was send a copy of the results to my mom. I didn't write her anything, just sent her the PDF of the paternity report by email. She called me like 5 minutes later, screaming that the results must be wrong, that we needed to do another test, that I should accept the baby anyway because she'd been my wife. I hung up on her without saying a word. Then I did something that maybe was going too far, but honestly I don't regret it. I made a Facebook post, public for everyone, where I wrote basically a complete expose of everything that had happened. I explained Michelle's affair, the paternity test that proved the baby wasn't mine, and specifically mentioned that my own mother had testified against me in court to force me to accept a child that wasn't mine just because she'd always wanted a daughter and now wanted a granddaughter. I didn't mention the baby's name or post photos of her because the baby was innocent in all this, but I put everything else out there for everyone to see. The response was massive. Hundreds of comments from relatives, friends, acquaintances, all expressing shock and support. Some of Vivian's acquaintances confronted her, asking how she could have done that. Joyce sent me furious messages threatening to sue me for defamation. But my lawyer responded that everything I'd written was documented truth and that if she tried anything legal, we would counter-sue. Michelle called me crying, begging me to accept the baby anyway, saying that Blake had refused to marry her or acknowledge the baby as his, and that she had nobody else. I told her that sounded like her problem, not mine, and hung up on her. The saddest thing, or maybe the most revealing, was that my mom didn't learn anything from all this. After the Facebook post, after all our family and friends found out what she'd done, she kept visiting Michelle and the baby. She started introducing herself as the girl's grandmother, posting photos with her on her social media, buying her gifts, basically living the fantasy she'd always wanted of having a daughter, except now it was with a granddaughter who wasn't even really her granddaughter. My dad put up with this for like 4 more months before he finally broke. One day I came home, E was still living with him, and he told me he was separating from Vivian. He told me she'd used money from their shared savings to buy expensive daughter, things for the baby, that she spent all her time talking about the girl, that she'd converted one of the rooms in the house into a baby room without consulting him, and that when he objected to anything, she'd accuse him of being insensitive and cruel. Basically, my mom had chosen my unfaithful ex-wife's daughter over her own husband and her own son. Raymond, my dad, moved in completely with me at the apartment I'd gotten back after the divorce. He started the divorce process from Vivian, asking for an equitable division of assets and nothing more. He didn't want alimony from her or want to fight over material things. He just wanted to end the marriage and move on with his life. Vivian was in shock, couldn't believe he was really leaving her, and blamed me for alienating her from her family. My dad told her clearly that she'd alienated herself when she decided that a fantasy about a granddaughter who wasn't even her granddaughter was more important than her son and her husband. That was like 8 months ago. My parents' divorce still isn't completely finalized because Vivian keeps fighting over silly things. But my dad and I are good. We live together, share expenses, and honestly our relationship is better than ever. He's dating someone new, a very nice lady he met at his work, and he looks happier than I've seen him in years. I'm also dating someone, a woman I met on a dating app like 4 months ago. Her name is Andrea. She's an elementary school teacher. And when I told her this whole story on our 3rd date, because he felt it was fair for her to know the drama she was potentially getting into, she just hugged me and told me that any mother who betrays her son that way doesn't deserve to be called a mother. It's still early in the relationship, but I feel good with her. I feel like myself, which is something I never felt with Michelle. Vivian keeps visiting Michelle and the baby, who's now like a 1.5 years old. She posts photos constantly, calls, herself, the grandmother, spends her money on them, basically living in her fantasy world where she got the daughter she always wanted, just in the form of a fake granddaughter. My extended family, my uncles, cousins, all cut contact with her after finding out what she did. She's basically alone except for Michelle and Joyce, who tolerate her because she gives them free money and attention. Sometimes I wonder if she'll ever realize what she lost. She lost her son. She lost her husband of over 30 years. She lost the respect of all her family and friends. And all for what? For an obsession with having a daughter that consumed her so much, she was willing to destroy her own son to keep that fantasy alive. The truth is, she'll probably never understand it, and I've made peace with that. My dad is planning to marry his girlfriend next year, and I'm going to be his best man, which is kind of weird but also very nice in a certain way. Andrea asked me recently if I'd ever forgive my mom if she apologized, and I had to think a lot about that question. Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to say yes, that forgiveness is important and that family should be able to overcome anything. But another part of me, the part that was sitting in that courtroom, listening to my own mother lie about me under oath to benefit the woman who betrayed me, that part says there are betrayals that simply can't be forgiven. For now, I'm focused on building my life away from all that drama. I work, go out with Andrea, spend time with my dad, see my friends. It's a simple life, but it's mine, and nobody's using me to fulfill their selfish fantasies. And I guess that's enough.